From the IWW, which is one of the early unions, still exists. They're a syndicalist union. They have this quote here about class struggle, which is even more forceful than the way Eugene Debs put it. That the working class and the employing class, so the workers versus the people with money and power, have nothing in common. There can be no peace so long as hunger and want are found among the millions of the working people. Between these two classes, a struggle must go on until the working class takes possession of the means of production, abolishes the wage system, and lives in harmony with the earth. By organizing industrially, we are forming the structure of a new society within the shell of the old, which is a pretty big radical quote that you might have even heard other places. But this one really sets the tone that it's not just abolishing poverty, but it's abolishing the wage system, which, as we were saying earlier, this whole wage system idea is keeps people controlled by the people that own private property, right? They say, I exclusively make decisions and all, and I'll pay you a wage, which is not what you're worth because I keep the profits, ha ha ha. So that's what they're talking about here. We want to abolish that kind of society. We want to create a society where when we all work together, our communities are benefiting from that work. We're producing the things we need, not just for the profits of a few. And we're doing it in harmony with the earth. I like that this quote also acknowledges that. It has to be in tune with nature, within the limits of nature and things, and not that grow or die infinite growth imperative that you see under capitalism.
Yeah, and I think this quote really drives home the shift in the union movement, especially in the United States, where most of our major, I call them nowadays corporate or collaborationist unions, right? Because in many ways, a lot of our unions have become collaborationists, right? They work with the capital to provide appeasement, but they've forgotten this. They've lost touch with this core thing that the union is the place where workers wage battle against capital. And it's really gotten sucked down into medical benefits and cost of living adjustments.
Right.
And this is kind of what we talked about at the beginning, right? We were talking about you have to stay true, and you have to constantly go back and refresh yourself with the values that you're putting forth, the values that you're fighting for. Because if you don't, you forget that there can be no peace so long as hunger and want are found among millions of working people. And instead, you put all of your resources into making sure your your finite membership, your limited membership gets their cost of living adjustment. Personal recent story. I was recently at my in-laws picking up my son, and my brother-in-law stopped me and said, "Help me form a union." And he works at a sandwich shop. And so I reached out to a union organizer friend that used to be the president of our local trades and labor council, and I said, "Hey Jim, who's doing work in the service industry? What union in town can help him unionize his workplace?" And the response was no one. And I live in a state capital. Every single major union has offices in my town, but those offices aren't here to help the working people of my town. They're here to lobby the legislature, right? That's why they exist here. And so in a town of 120,000 people, none of the modern labor organizations are doing any work in trying to organize the service industry where our most oppressed live. And so it's important to it's why we have to go back, right? I was in class years ago and someone listed unions as a defining property of socialism. And I pushed back and I said, what you're talking about are unions are a property of capitalism. They're a moderation of capitalism. If we got rid of capitalism, we wouldn't have the institutions that we call unions anymore. There would still be worker organizations, but they would function in a radically different way that we could all, it's kind of like saying talking about community control of the police, right? The public safety apparatus that's being talked about in community control of the police is such a radically different, in radical forms of community control at least.
Mhm.
So radically different from policing that we probably shouldn't call it policing anymore, right? They shouldn't
Right.
be police anymore. They're doing something different in a public safety mindset instead of an authoritarian policing mindset. So, and then the same goes for unions, right? What we think of as unions are a response directly to capitalism. They aren't an expression of socialism. Especially the modern major unions are incredibly anti-democratic. So it's just it's always refreshing to, and the IWW is still around, right? You can be a wobbly, you can pay your dues, and one of the great things about the IWW, if you're like my brother-in-law and don't have any institutional support and want to unionize, you can run an independent NLRB election through the IWW, right? You sign up for them. You don't get as much, support. They don't have the resources to, send an organizer to you, like an SEIU type union might. But if you're like, me here in a state capital in the Midwest and have zero support going on, the IWW still exists with this radical outtake, this radical perspective, and they can help you.
Yeah, exactly. That's an important distinction that many of the unions that won the 40-hour work week and all that stuff were these radical unions that were fighting against capitalism itself. They declared capitalism itself to be the enemy. and when they won things like that, they didn't see that as the end goal. They saw that as, that's a one stop on the way toward abolishing capitalism. And unfortunately, many of the unions have been co-opted into the Democratic Party, into today's capitalist ruling structure, to where now they manage capital more than they fight capital.
Yeah.
So it's an important distinction. I think when we talk about a socialist society, yes, unions are important, but it has to be this radical union that is really committed to the broader struggle.